The cowboy's horse kicked up dust as he rounded the bend. And there she was, a solitary figure in a calico dress walking the endless trail with nothing but the clothes on her back and determination in her stride. Marcus Tanner pulled his mare to a slow halt, studying the woman ahead through the shimmering heat waves rising off the parched Arkansas earth. It was 1878, and the trail between Fort Smith and Bentonville was no place for a woman alone, especially not one without a horse, wagon, or even a canteen from what he could see. He urged his horse forward at a walk, not wanting to startle her. The woman turned at the sound of hoofbeats, her hand instinctively going to her throat. Marcus could see now that she was young, probably in her early 20s, with auburn hair pulled back in a simple bun and eyes that held both wariness and exhaustion. Her dress was dusty and worn, but there was something about the way she stood that spoke of dignity despite her circumstances. "Madam," Marcus called out, tipping his hat as he approached. "This trail's a long one to be walking alone." She straightened her shoulders, meeting his gaze directly. "I can manage just fine, thank you." Marcus dismounted, keeping a respectful distance. Up close, he could see the sunburn on her nose and cheeks, the way her lips were chapped from the dry air. She'd been walking for some time, that much was clear. He was 26 himself, weathered from years of working cattle ranches and riding the open range, but he knew desperation when he saw it. "I don't doubt that, madam, but these parts can be dangerous. There's still outlaws roaming these hills, and it's a good 20 miles to Bentonville." He gestured to his horse. "I've got water if you need it." The woman hesitated, pride warring with need, and need finally won. She nodded slightly. Water would be appreciated. Marcus pulled his canteen from his saddle and handed it to her. She drank carefully, not gulping despite what must have been terrible thirst. When she finished, she handed it back with a quiet thank you. "Name's Marcus Tanner," he offered. "I work the Sullivan Ranch just outside Bentonville." "Brielle Meadows," she replied, and there was something in the way she said it that made him think she was glad to leave whatever came before that name behind. "Where are you headed, Miss Meadows?" She looked down the trail, then back at him. Her eyes were green, he noticed, like new spring grass. "I'm looking for a new beginning," she said simply. "Bentonville seems as good a place as any to find one." There was a story there, Marcus could tell, but he didn't press. Everyone who came west had a story, and most of them included something worth leaving behind. "Well, I'm headed that way myself. You're welcome to ride with me if you'd like. My horse can carry 2, and it'll save your feet." Brielle studied him for a long moment, weighing her options. He could see her making calculations, assessing whether he was trustworthy or just another danger in a world full of them. Finally, she nodded. "I'd be grateful for the ride, but I'll sit behind you if that's all right." "That's just fine," Marcus agreed, understanding her need for caution. He mounted first, then extended his hand to help her up. She settled behind him, sitting as far back as possible while still maintaining her balance, her hands barely touching his sides. They rode in silence for a while, the horse's steady gait eating up the miles. Marcus was acutely aware of her presence behind him, the way she swayed slightly with the horse's movement, the sound of her breathing. He wasn't used to having a woman this close, his life having been mostly cattle and cards and the occasional dance in town. "What brings you back to Bentonville?" Brielle asked finally, breaking the silence. "Been down to Fort Smith picking up supplies for the ranch. Mr. Sullivan needed some special equipment for the new barn he's building." Marcus adjusted his hat against the afternoon sun. "I work as his foreman, been with him about 4 years now." "Is it a good ranch?" "One of the best in this part of Arkansas. Mr. Sullivan treats his men fair, pays on time, doesn't work us to death. His wife's a good woman too. They've got 3 children, all still young. Brielle was quiet for a moment. Do you think they might need help? I can cook and clean, do laundry, mend clothes. I'm a hard worker. Marcus considered this. Mrs. Sullivan had mentioned just last week that she could use help around the house, especially with the new baby keeping her up nights. They might at that. Mrs. Sullivan's been saying she needs an extra pair of hands. I could put in a word for you if you'd like. I'd appreciate that very much. There was relief in her voice, the first real emotion she'd allowed to show. They rode on as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The landscape around them was a mix of rolling hills and scattered oak trees, the grass brown from summer heat, but still beautiful in its own way. Marcus had always loved this land, harsh as it could be. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said after another stretch of silence. "You can ask. I may not answer." Fair enough, he thought. "You got any family waiting for you in Bentonville?" "No family anywhere," Brielle said quietly. "Not anymore." The finality in her voice told him not to pursue that line of questioning. Instead, he said, "Bentonville's a good town, growing fast with the railroad talk. People there are decent for the most part. You'll find your new beginning there, I reckon." "I hope so." Her voice was so soft he almost missed it. As the sun touched the horizon, Marcus spotted a familiar landmark. "We'll be there within the hour. Sullivan Ranch is about 2 miles outside town. If you don't mind, we could stop there first. Get you introduced to Mrs. Sullivan tonight, and if it works out, you'd have a place to sleep. If not, I can take you into town to the boarding house." "That would be fine," Brielle agreed. The sky was deepening to purple when they finally rode up to the Sullivan Ranch. It was a sprawling property with a large main house, several outbuildings, and corrals holding horses and cattle. Lamplight glowed warm in the windows of the main house, and Marcus could see Mr. Sullivan on the porch, probably enjoying his evening pipe. James Sullivan stood as they approached, a tall man in his 40s with graying hair and kind eyes. "Marcus, good to have you back. I see you brought company." Marcus dismounted and helped Brielle down. She stumbled slightly after so long on horseback, and he steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "Mr. Sullivan, this is Miss Brielle Meadows. Found her walking the trail from Fort Smith. She's looking for work, and I thought maybe Mrs. Sullivan could use some help around the house." James Sullivan studied Brielle with the same assessing look Marcus had used earlier, but his expression was kind. "My wife has been asking for help. Come on inside, Miss Meadows. Let's see what Sarah thinks." Sarah Sullivan was a plump, cheerful woman with flour on her apron and a baby on her hip. When they explained the situation, her face lit up. "Oh, James, this is an answer to my prayers. I've been running myself ragged trying to keep up with the house and the children and the cooking for the hands." She turned to Brielle. "Can you cook, dear?" "Yes, madam." "I can cook, clean, do laundry, tend gardens, preserve food, and so." "When can you start?" Sarah asked with a laugh. "Right now, if you need me to." They worked out the details quickly. Brielle would have a room in the small cottage behind the main house, the same one where the previous housekeeper had lived before she married and moved away. She'd receive wages plus room and board, and her duties would include helping with the cooking, cleaning, and minding the children when needed. Marcus helped carry Brielle's meager belongings to the cottage, which consisted of nothing more than what she'd been carrying in her pockets. The cottage was small but clean, with a bed, a dresser, a small table and chair, and a pot-bellied stove. "It's perfect," Brielle said, looking around with something like wonder in her eyes. "Mrs. Sullivan will probably have some spare dresses and things you can use until you earn enough to buy your own," Marcus offered. "She's good about that kind of thing." Brielle turned to him, and for the first time since he'd found her on the trail, she smiled. It transformed her whole face, making her beautiful despite the sunburn and exhaustion. "Thank you, Mr. Tanner. You didn't have to help me, but you did. I won't forget that." Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the summer heat. Just Marcus is fine. "And you're welcome, Miss Meadows. I hope you find that new beginning you're looking for." "Just Brielle is fine too," she said softly. He tipped his hat and left her to settle in. But as he walked back to the bunkhouse where he had his own small room, Marcus found himself thinking about green eyes and auburn hair, and the courage it took to walk alone down a dusty trail looking for something better. The next morning, Marcus woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, better than the usual burnt offerings the ranch hands took turns making. He dressed quickly and headed to the main house where the men took their meals. Brielle was in the kitchen, her hair neatly braided and wearing one of Mrs. Sullivan's dresses, slightly too large but clean and proper. She moved efficiently between the stove and the table, serving up plates of eggs, bacon, biscuits, and gravy. "Morning," Marcus said as he took his usual seat. "Good morning," Brielle replied, setting a plate in front of him. Their eyes met briefly, and she looked away quickly, a slight flush coloring her cheeks. The other ranch hands filed in, 8 men of various ages who worked the cattle and maintained the property. They were a rough bunch but decent, and they greeted Brielle with respectful nods and madams. Marcus noticed how Charlie Watts, one of the younger hands, let his gaze linger a bit too long on Brielle, and felt an unexpected surge of something that might have been jealousy. Over the following weeks, Marcus found himself looking forward to meals with an anticipation that had nothing to do with food. Brielle settled into her role quickly, and the Sullivan household ran smoother than it had in months. The children adored her. Mrs. Sullivan sang her praises, and even Mr. Sullivan admitted that hiring her was one of the best decisions they'd made. Marcus made excuses to be around the main house more often. He'd offer to fix things that didn't really need fixing, volunteer to help Mrs. Sullivan with heavy lifting, or find reasons to check on the garden where Brielle often worked in the late afternoon. They'd talk while she tended the vegetables, conversations that started simple but grew deeper over time. He learned that she'd been married before, to a man in Missouri who died in a farming accident 2 years ago. She tried to keep the farm going but lost it to debts she hadn't known her husband had accrued. With nowhere else to go and no family to turn to, she decided to head west and start over. "I just kept walking," she told him one evening as they sat on the porch of her cottage, watching the sunset. "Every step was taking me further from everything I'd lost and closer to whatever comes next. When you found me, I'd been walking for 3 days. I'd used the last of my money for a stagecoach ticket that only got me halfway, and then I just walked." "That took courage," Marcus said. "It took desperation," Brielle corrected. "Courage is when you have a choice. You had choices. You could have given up, could have turned to less respectable means of survival, but you kept walking. That's courage in my book." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and Marcus felt that warmth in his chest again, stronger this time. The evening light caught in her hair, turning it to burnished copper, and he had the sudden urge to reach out and touch it to see if it felt as soft as it looked. "What about you?" Brielle asked. "What brought you to ranching?" Marcus leaned back against the porch post. "Family was farmers in Tennessee. Poor as dirt, and my pa had a mean streak that got worse when he drank, which was often. I left when I was 16, worked my way west doing whatever jobs I could find. Learned cattle work in Texas, drifted north, ended up here. Mr. Sullivan gave me a chance when a lot of men wouldn't have, and I've been here ever since." "You miss Tennessee?" "Not even a little bit. This is home now." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the crickets and the distant lowing of cattle. Marcus knew he was falling for her, had probably been falling since the moment she'd said she was looking for a new beginning with such determination in her voice. But he also knew she was healing from losses he couldn't fully understand, and he didn't want to push her before she was ready. Summer turned to fall, and the work on the ranch intensified as they prepared for winter. Marcus led the hands in rounding up cattle, mending fences, and storing hay. Brielle helped Mrs. Sullivan with canning and preserving, putting up vegetables and fruits for the cold months ahead. They still found time to talk, though, stolen moments that Marcus treasured. One Saturday evening, there was a dance in Bentonville. The whole town turned out for these events, held in the church hall with music provided by anyone who could play an instrument. Mr. Sullivan encouraged all his hands to go, giving them the evening off. Marcus cleaned up better than usual, borrowing some bay rum from one of the other hands and wearing his good shirt. When he saw Brielle emerge from her cottage in a dress Mrs. Sullivan had given her, dark blue with white trim, his breath caught. She'd left her hair down and it fell in waves past her shoulders. "You look beautiful," he said before he could stop himself. Brielle ducked her head, but he could see her smile. "Thank you. You look very nice yourself." They rode to town in one of the ranch wagons, along with several of the other hands and the Sullivan family. The church hall was already crowded when they arrived, with lanterns hanging from the rafters and tables set up along the walls laden with food. A fiddle player, a guitarist, and a man with a harmonica provided music that was lively if not always perfectly in tune. Marcus had never been much of a dancer, but when Brielle looked uncertain standing at the edge of the crowd, he found his courage. "Would you like to dance?" She hesitated only a moment before nodding. He led her onto the floor for a simple waltz, one hand at her waist and the other holding hers. She was a good dancer, light on her feet, and they moved together easily. Marcus was aware of every point where they touched, the warmth of her hand in his, the slight weight of his other hand on her waist. "I haven't danced since my wedding," Brielle said quietly. "I'd forgotten how nice it feels." "I'm glad you're dancing now," Marcus replied. "I'm glad you're here." They danced 3 more dances before Charlie Watts approached and asked Brielle for a turn. Marcus had to step aside, watching as Charlie held her perhaps a bit closer than necessary. The jealousy he'd felt before returned, stronger now, and he had to remind himself that Brielle could dance with whoever she pleased. But when the music ended and Brielle returned to his side, choosing to stand with him rather than accept another dance invitation, Marcus felt something settle in his chest. Maybe, just maybe, she felt something for him too. On the ride back to the ranch, they sat together in the back of the wagon. The night was cool and Brielle shivered slightly. Without thinking, Marcus took off his jacket and draped it around her shoulders. "Thank you," she said softly. "You're always taking care of me." "I like taking care of you," Marcus admitted. Then, because the moonlight made him brave and because he couldn't hold it in any longer, he added, "I've come to care for you a great deal, Brielle." She was quiet for so long he thought maybe he'd made a terrible mistake. But then she said, "I care for you too, Marcus. I didn't want to. I didn't think I could feel this way again after losing everything. But you've been so kind, so patient. You make me believe in new beginnings." Marcus took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. She squeezed back and they rode the rest of the way in silence, hands clasped, hearts full. After that night, their relationship changed. They were courting now, though they both understood it would be a slow process. Brielle needed time, and Marcus was willing to give her all the time she needed. They took walks together in the evenings, sat together at church on Sundays, found excuses to be in each other's company. Mrs. Sullivan was delighted, having noticed the growing attachment between them. Mr. Sullivan pulled Marcus aside one day while they were working on a fence. "That's a good woman you're courting. She's been through hard times, but she's strong. You treat her right, you hear?" "I intend to, sir. She means the world to me." "Good, you're like a son to me, Marcus. I want to see you happy." Winter came early that year, with snow falling in November and temperatures dropping below freezing. The ranch work became harder, with cattle to feed and water that had to be broken free of ice. But inside the main house, there was warmth and laughter. Brielle had become part of the family, not just an employee, and the Sullivan children followed her around like ducklings. Christmas was approaching, and Marcus wanted to give Brielle something special. He rode into town on a supply run and stopped at the general store, looking at the limited selection of goods suitable for a woman. Finally, he settled on a shawl, soft wool in a deep green that would match her eyes. It wasn't much, but it was all he could afford, and he hoped she'd like it. The Sullivan family had a tradition of exchanging small gifts on Christmas Eve. They all gathered in the main house, a fire roaring in the hearth, and the smell of pine from the tree the children had helped decorate. Marcus waited nervously for his chance to give Brielle her gift. When she opened it, her eyes went wide. "Marcus, this is beautiful. You didn't have to." "I wanted to. I wanted you to have something nice, something that's just yours." Brielle's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy tears. She stood and hugged him, right there in front of everyone, and Marcus wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. Over her shoulder, he saw Mrs. Sullivan wipe her own eyes, and Mr. Sullivan give him an approving nod. "I have something for you too," Brielle said, pulling back. She handed him a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a shirt she'd sewn herself, the stitches neat and perfect, made from fabric that must have cost her a month's wages. "Brielle, this is too much," Marcus protested. "No, it's not enough. Not for everything you've done for me." She touched his cheek gently. "You gave me a new beginning, Marcus. You gave me hope." He kissed her then, a gentle kiss that promised more but respected the place and the audience. When they pulled apart, the Sullivan children were giggling, but the adults were smiling. That night, walking Brielle back to her cottage, Marcus knew he wanted to marry her. He wanted to wake up next to her every morning, share his life with her, build a future together. But he also knew he needed to do it right, to give her time and to have something more to offer than his wages as a ranch foreman. Over the next months, Marcus saved every penny he could spare. He talked to Mr. Sullivan about his plans, and the older man made him an offer. There was a section of Sullivan land, about 100 acres near the eastern boundary, that wasn't being used. If Marcus wanted to start his own small ranch, he could buy it on credit, paying Mr. Sullivan back over time. "You've been a good foreman, loyal and hardworking," Mr. Sullivan said. "But I know you want more. Every man should have his own land, his own legacy. This way you can have both. You can keep working for me part-time, build up your own herd slowly. It'll be hard work, but I know you can do it." Marcus was overwhelmed by the generosity. "I don't know what to say, sir." "Say yes. Then go ask that young woman to marry you. She'll say yes too, I reckon." Spring came with a rush of green growth and wildflowers. Marcus had been working on building a small house on his new land, getting up before dawn to work on it before his regular duties started, staying late into the evening until he could barely see. Some of the other ranch hands helped when they had time, and slowly the house took shape. It wasn't much, just 3 rooms and a porch, but it was solid and it was his. One Sunday afternoon in April, Marcus asked Brielle to take a walk with him. He led her to his land, to the house that was nearly finished. "What do you think?" he asked nervously. Brielle walked through the rooms, running her hands over the walls he'd built, looking out the windows at the view of rolling hills and distant mountains. It's wonderful, Marcus. You must be so proud. I built it for you, he said. For us, if you'll have me. She turned to face him, and he saw understanding dawning in her eyes. Marcus took a deep breath and pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside was a simple gold band, nothing fancy but honest and true like his feelings. He got down on one knee right there in the unfinished house. Brielle Meadows, from the moment I found you walking that dusty trail, my life changed. You were looking for a new beginning, and somehow you became mine too. I love you more than I knew it was possible to love someone. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Tears streamed down Brielle's face as she nodded. Yes, yes, Marcus, I'll marry you. I love you too, so much it scares me sometimes. He stood and slipped the ring on her finger, then kissed her properly. Not the gentle, chaste kisses they'd shared before, but a kiss that spoke of love and desire and commitment. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathless. I want to do this right, Marcus said. I know you were married before, and I know you lost him. I can't promise I'll never leave you because none of us know what tomorrow brings. But I can promise I'll love you with everything I have for as long as I live. I'll work hard to give you a good life. I'll respect you and cherish you and stand beside you through whatever comes. That's all I could ever ask for, Brielle said. You've already given me so much, Marcus. You gave me hope when I had none. You gave me a home when I was lost. You gave me love when I thought I'd never feel it again. I promise to love you, to be your partner in all things, to build this new beginning with you. They were married 6 weeks later in the small church in Bentonville. Mrs. Sullivan helped Brielle make a wedding dress from white cotton, simple but elegant. Mr. Sullivan walked her down the aisle, having become a father figure to her over the months. The church was full of well-wishers, ranch hands and townspeople who'd come to know and respect both of them. Marcus stood at the altar in his new shirt, the one Brielle had made him, and watched her walk toward him. She was so beautiful it made his chest ache, but more than that, she was strong and kind and brave. She was everything he'd never dared to dream he might find. They spoke their vows in clear voices, promising to love and honor each other. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Marcus kissed his bride with joy and relief and love that seemed too big to contain. The reception was held at the Sullivan Ranch, with tables set up outside and food enough to feed an army. There was music and dancing and laughter. When it was time for Marcus and Brielle to leave, heading to their own land and their own home for the first time as husband and wife, the crowd cheered and threw rice. They rode together on Marcus's horse, Brielle sitting in front of him this time, his arms around her. It was so different from that first ride almost a year ago, when she'd sat behind him and barely touched him, when she'd been running from her past and he'd been just a stranger offering help. The house was small and simple, but Brielle had helped furnish it over the past weeks. There was a bed with a quilt Mrs. Sullivan had given them, a table and chairs, a stove, curtains at the windows. It was a home, and it was theirs. That night, in the privacy of their own house on their own land, Marcus and Brielle truly became husband and wife. He was gentle with her, mindful that she'd been widowed for years and that this might bring back memories. But Brielle met him with equal passion, showing him without words that this was different, that they were building something new together. Afterward, they lay together in the darkness, her head on his chest and his arms around her. "Are you happy?" Marcus asked softly. "Happier than I ever thought I'd be again," Brielle replied. "When I was walking that trail, I was so lost, Marcus. I didn't know where I was going or what I'd find. I just knew I couldn't stay where I was. And then you came along and everything changed." "We changed together," Marcus said. "You changed me too, Brielle. I was content before, but I wasn't truly happy. I was just going through the motions, working and saving and not really living. You made me want more. You made me want this, a home and a family and a future. We'll build a good life here, Brielle said. I know it won't always be easy, but we'll do it together. They fell asleep tangled together, the wind rustling through the trees outside and the stars bright above their little house. Marcus continued working part-time for Mr. Sullivan while building up his own small herd of cattle. Brielle kept house and started a vegetable garden, selling her excess produce in town. They worked hard, but they were happy, stealing kisses while working side by side, sitting together on their porch in the evenings talking about their dreams. By fall, Brielle realized she was pregnant. She'd suspected for a few weeks but waited to be sure before telling Marcus. When she finally did, one evening as they sat by the fire, he was speechless with joy. "A baby," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "We're going to have a baby, we are," Brielle confirmed, laughing at his expression. "Are you happy?" Happy doesn't begin to cover it. Marcus pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she might break. "You've made me the luckiest man alive." Brielle Tanner. The pregnancy wasn't easy. Brielle was sick for the first few months, barely able to keep food down. Marcus worried constantly, hovering over her until she finally told him to stop fussing and let her rest. But he couldn't help it. The thought of losing her, of losing this future they were building, terrified him. Mrs. Sullivan was a godsend during those months, coming over regularly to check on Brielle and offering advice based on her own experiences. The bond between the two women had grown deep, more like mother and daughter than employer and former employee. As winter set in again, Brielle's health improved and her belly grew round with their child. Marcus would lie with his hand on her stomach, feeling the baby kick, marveling at the miracle of it. They spent the long winter evenings making plans, arguing good-naturedly over names, and preparing their home for the new arrival. In March of 1880, nearly 2 years after Marcus had found Brielle walking that dusty trail, she went into labor. It was a long, difficult birth that lasted through the night and into the next day. Marcus paced outside the bedroom where Mrs. Sullivan and the midwife attended to Brielle, feeling helpless and terrified every time he heard her cry out in pain. Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, he heard a different sound, the thin wail of a newborn baby. Mrs. Sullivan emerged, tired but smiling. "You have a son, Marcus, and Brielle is doing fine." Marcus burst into the room, finding Brielle exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "Come meet your son," she said softly. He approached carefully, looking down at the impossibly small face, the tiny fingers that wrapped around his when he offered them. "He's perfect," Marcus whispered. "You're both perfect." They named him Matthew, after Brielle's father who she'd lost when she was young. Little Matthew had his mother's green eyes and a surprisingly full head of dark hair like his father. Marcus had never known it was possible to love someone so instantly and completely. The first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful. Matthew was a demanding baby, waking frequently through the night and crying more than seemed possible for such a small person. But watching Brielle nurse their son, seeing her sing lullabies while rocking him to sleep, made Marcus fall in love with her all over again. Their small ranch grew slowly but steadily. Marcus bought more cattle, built better fences, expanded their pastures. Brielle's garden flourished, and she started keeping chickens for eggs and meat. They weren't wealthy, but they were making it, building a life one day at a time. When Matthew was 6 months old, Mr. Sullivan offered to sell Marcus another parcel of land at a fair price. With this addition, the Tanner Ranch would be a respectable size, large enough to support a growing family. Marcus and Brielle talked it over and decided to take the risk, knowing it would mean more debt and more work, but also more opportunity. The community of Bentonville continued to grow around them. The railroad finally came through in 1881, bringing more people and commerce to the region. Marcus sold his cattle for better prices with easier access to markets. Brielle started selling her preserves and baked goods at the new general store in town, adding to their income. Life settled into a rhythm of work and family, seasons passing with their familiar patterns. Matthew grew from a baby into a curious toddler who followed his father everywhere, trying to help with chores he was far too small to actually assist with. Marcus was endlessly patient with him, explaining everything he did and why, teaching him about the land and the animals and the work that sustained them. In the spring of 1882, Brielle discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, and in December, she delivered a healthy baby girl they named Beth. With her auburn hair and perfect features, she looked just like her mother, and Marcus joked that he was in trouble because he'd never be able to say no to those green eyes, whether they belonged to his wife or his daughter. The family dynamic shifted with Beth's arrival. Matthew, now 2.5, was initially jealous of the attention the baby received, but soon became fiercely protective of his little sister. Marcus would find him standing by her cradle, patting her gently and telling her about the ranch in his toddler vocabulary that only his parents could fully understand. As the children grew, the ranch grew with them. Marcus hired 2 hands to help with the increasing work, men he trusted who lived in a small bunkhouse he'd built on the property. Brielle managed the household with impressive efficiency, taking care of 2 young children, maintaining their home, and still finding time to contribute to their income with her garden and preserves. They had hard times too. A drought in 1883 killed some of their cattle and withered the garden. Marcus had to take a temporary job working for the railroad to make ends meet, leaving before dawn and returning after dark, exhausted. Brielle stretched every penny, made do with less, and somehow kept the household running smoothly. They learned they could weather storms together, that their partnership was strong enough to handle whatever came. By 1885, 7 years after Marcus had found Brielle on that dusty trail, the Tanner Ranch was thriving. They'd paid off their debts to Mr. Sullivan and even had a little money saved. Matthew was 5 and Beth was 2, both healthy and happy. Marcus had built additions to their house, including a separate bedroom for the children and a larger kitchen for Brielle. One evening in late summer, they sat on their porch watching the sunset, as they'd done countless times before. The children were inside, supposedly sleeping but more likely playing quietly in their room. Brielle was sitting in the rocking chair Marcus had made for her, and he sat on the porch rail, looking at his land, his home, his life. "You ever think about that day?" Brielle asked. "When you found me on the trail, all the time," Marcus admitted. "Best day of my life, even though I didn't know it then." "I was so scared," Brielle said quietly. "I was trying to be brave, but inside I was terrified. I had no real plan, no idea what I was going to do. I just knew I had to keep moving forward. And look at you now, look at us." Brielle smiled, reaching out to take his hand. "We did all right, didn't we?" "We did more than all right. We built something real, something lasting." Marcus squeezed her hand. "I love you, Brielle. More now than the day we married, and I'll love you more tomorrow than I do today." "That's quite a promise, considering how much you love me today." "It's not a promise, it's a fact." They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. From inside, they heard Matthew's voice raised in laughter and Beth's answering giggle. The sound made them both smile. "We should probably go check on them," Brielle said without making any move to get up. Probably, Marcus agreed, also not moving. In a minute. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing of seasons and the growth of their children. Matthew started school in Bentonville, riding to town each day on a pony Marcus gave him for his 6th birthday. He was smart like his mother, taking to reading and arithmetic with ease. Beth was more like Marcus, preferring to be outside, helping with the animals and getting gloriously dirty in the process. In 1887, Brielle had another baby, another boy they named Benjamin. This pregnancy had been a surprise, as they'd thought their family was complete, but Benjamin was welcomed with joy. Matthew and Beth adored their baby brother, fighting over who got to hold him, who got to help feed him, who got to make him laugh. Marcus was 35 now, his face weathered by sun and wind but his body still strong from hard work. Brielle was 30, more beautiful to him than she'd been at 22, the years adding character to her features and confidence to her bearing. She was no longer the desperate woman walking alone on a dusty trail. She was a wife, a mother, a successful businesswoman, and a cornerstone of their community. The Tanner family became well known in Bentonville. Marcus served on the town council, helping make decisions about schools and roads and other civic matters. Brielle organized church socials and taught Sunday school. Their children were well behaved and well liked. The ranch was prosperous and growing. But it wasn't the prosperity or the reputation that mattered to Marcus. It was the small moments. Brielle's hand in his as they walked to church. Matthew's excited voice showing him something he'd learned in school. Beth's sticky kiss after she'd been eating berries. Benjamin's laugh when Marcus tossed him in the air. These were the riches that truly mattered. One autumn evening in 1888, 10 years after they'd met, Marcus and Brielle celebrated their anniversary. The children were spending the night with the Sullivans, giving them a rare evening alone. They dressed up and went to dinner at the new restaurant in Bentonville, a fancy place with tablecloths and candles and food they didn't have to cook themselves. 10 years, Brielle said, raising her glass of wine. It hardly seems possible. Longest and shortest 10 years of my life, Marcus replied, clinking his glass against hers. I can barely remember what life was like before you. It was probably quieter, Brielle said with a laugh, thinking of their 3 energetic children. Quieter but emptier. You filled up all the spaces I didn't even know were empty. After dinner, they walked through town, arms linked, talking about everything and nothing. They passed the spot where Marcus had first brought Brielle all those years ago, when she'd been a stranger and he'd been just a cowboy trying to help. Do you remember when we danced at that church social? Brielle asked. You were so nervous. I was terrified. I hadn't danced in years and I didn't want to step on your feet. You didn't step on my feet even once. You were actually quite good. That's because I was paying very close attention to what I was doing. I didn't want to mess up my chance with you. They stopped in front of the church where they'd been married. Do you ever regret it? Marcus asked quietly. Taking a chance on me, Brielle turned to face him, cupping his face in her hands. Not for one single second. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Marcus Tanner. You and our children. This life we built. I wouldn't change any of it. He kissed her there under the stars, in front of the church where they'd pledged their lives to each other, and it felt like a renewal of those vows. They walked back to the ranch hand in hand, talking about their plans for the future. They wanted to expand the ranch further, maybe buy some horses to breed and sell. They wanted to make sure all 3 children got good educations. They wanted to grow old together, watching their children grow and maybe someday their grandchildren too. Life continued its steady march forward. The children grew and changed. Matthew became a serious young man who loved learning and talked about maybe becoming a teacher. Beth remained a tomboy who could ride and rope as well as any of the ranch hands. Benjamin was still young but showed signs of having inherited his father's way with animals. In 1890, tragedy struck when Mr. Sullivan passed away suddenly from a heart attack. He was 62, and while that wasn't young, it felt far too soon. The funeral was enormous, with people coming from all over the county to pay their respects to a man who'd been generous and fair to everyone he met. Marcus served as one of the pallbearers, tears streaming down his face as they carried the coffin. Mr. Sullivan had been more than an employer. He'd been a mentor, a friend, a father figure. He'd given Marcus his start, believed in him when others might not have, sold him land on credit and trust alone. Mrs. Sullivan was devastated but tried to stay strong for her children, now grown with families of their own. She pulled Marcus aside after the funeral. "James thought of you as a son," she told him. "He was so proud of what you built, so happy that you and Brielle found each other. He told me once that giving you that land was one of the best things he ever did." "He changed my life," Marcus said, his voice rough. "I don't know what I would have done without his help. You would have succeeded anyway. James saw that in you from the start. He just helped you get there a little faster." The Sullivan children decided to sell the ranch, none of them wanting to take it over. Marcus bought a portion of it, the land that bordered his own property, making the Tanner Ranch one of the largest in the area. It was bittersweet, owning land that had belonged to the man who'd given him his start, but Marcus vowed to honor Mr. Sullivan's memory by being as fair and generous with his own workers as Sullivan had been with him. The 1890s brought more changes. Bentonville continued to grow, with new businesses opening and more families moving to the area. The Tanner Ranch grew with it, becoming a significant employer and contributor to the local economy. Marcus was respected throughout the county as a fair boss and shrewd businessman. But he never forgot where he came from. He gave jobs to men down on their luck, just as Sullivan had done for him. He extended credit to neighbors struggling through hard times. He and Brielle donated to the church and the school and various charitable causes. They remembered what it was like to have nothing and were determined to help others who were in similar situations. Matthew finished school and surprised everyone by announcing he wanted to be a rancher after all. He'd inherited his father's love of the land and his mother's head for business. Marcus began teaching him everything he knew about running a ranch, preparing to eventually hand over the reins. Beth, contrary to everyone's expectations, fell in love with a young lawyer who moved to Bentonville to start a practice. Despite her rough and tumble ways, she became a proper lady when she was with him, though she still insisted on riding astride rather than side saddle. They married when she was 19, and Marcus walked her down the aisle with tears in his eyes, remembering her as the tiny baby with auburn hair who'd looked just like her mother. Benjamin, the youngest, was still finding his way, but he had time. He was only 12, all gangly limbs and big ideas, but Marcus saw flashes of both himself and Brielle in the boy. In 1895, 17 years after Marcus had found Brielle on that dusty trail, they sat on their porch once again. It had become their ritual, this evening time together, watching the sun set over land that was theirs. The house had been expanded twice more and was now quite substantial. The ranch stretched as far as they could see, dotted with cattle and horses. "We did good, didn't we?" Brielle said, echoing words she'd spoken years before. "We did real good," Marcus agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd just ridden past that day? If you'd decided I wasn't your problem, I think about it sometimes." And then I think about how empty my life would have been, and I thank God I didn't. I think about it too. I think about how close I came to giving up, to just sitting down on that trail and waiting to die. But something kept me moving forward. Maybe it was knowing you were coming, even though I didn't know you existed yet. Marcus pulled her close, and she leaned against him, fitting perfectly under his arm as she always had. "We were meant to find each other," he said. "I truly believe that. All the things that happened to both of us, good and bad, led us to that moment on that trail. I believe that too." They watched the sky turn orange and pink and purple, the familiar Kansas stars beginning to appear. From inside the house, they could hear Benjamin practicing his reading, stumbling over the big words. In town, Beth was probably making dinner for her husband. Matthew was out checking the cattle with the ranch hands, taking his responsibilities seriously. "We built something that will last," Brielle said. "Not just the ranch, but a family, a legacy. Our children and their children and their children's children will remember us." "I don't need them to remember me," Marcus said. "I just need them to be happy, to have good lives. That's legacy enough." "You're a good man, Marcus Tanner." "You make me want to be good, Brielle." They sat together until full dark, then went inside to their home, their life, their everything. Behind them, the land stretched out under the stars, the land they'd built together from nothing but determination and love. Years continued to pass, as years always do. Matthew married a girl from town, a smart young woman who understood ranch life and fit into the family perfectly. They gave Marcus and Brielle their first grandchild in 1898, a boy named James in honor of Mr. Sullivan. Marcus held that tiny baby and felt the circle of life continuing, felt the weight of generations past and generations to come. Beth had 2 children of her own, both girls who were as spirited as their mother. Benjamin grew into a fine young man who decided he wanted to be a veterinarian, heading off to study in Little Rock. Marcus was proud of all of them, proud of the adults his children had become. In 1900, as a new century dawned, Marcus was 48 and Brielle was 42. They were grandparents now, with lines on their faces and gray in their hair, but they were still in love, still partners in all things. The ranch was thriving, their children were happy and successful, and their life together was everything they'd hoped it would be. One summer evening, Marcus suggested they take a ride, just the 2 of them. They rode out to the eastern boundary of their land, to the place where Marcus had built their first small house. It was still standing, though they'd long since moved into the larger house closer to the center of their property. They'd kept the small house maintained, using it occasionally for storage or as a place for hired hands to stay. They dismounted and went inside. The furniture was gone, but the structure was sound. The bedroom where Beth had been born, the kitchen where they'd shared countless meals, the living room where they'd sat by the fire and dreamed of their future. "Remember when we thought this was a mansion?" Brielle said with a laugh. "We were so proud of this little house. It was a mansion. It was ours, and that made it the most important building in the world." Marcus walked to the window, looking out at the view he'd loved for over 20 years. "I proposed to you here, right in this room. You were looking out this window and I got down on one knee right there. I remember. I was so surprised. I knew I loved you, but I wasn't sure you felt the same way. And then you showed me this house and asked me to marry you, and I thought my heart would burst from happiness. Mine did burst. I'm pretty sure I died and came back to life when you said yes." Brielle came to stand beside him, and he wrapped his arm around her waist as he'd done thousands of times before. "We should fix this place up," she said. "Maybe Matthew and his family could live here, or we could save it for Benjamin when he comes back from school. Or we could keep it just like this," Marcus suggested. A reminder of where we started, of what we built from nothing. I like that idea. They stayed until sunset, walking around the property, remembering. Marcus showed Brielle where he'd planned to put a barn but then changed his mind. Brielle showed him where her first garden had been, now overgrown but still visible if you knew where to look. I was so scared that first year, Brielle admitted. Scared of failing, of not being a good enough wife, of losing you like I'd lost my first husband. Every time you rode out to work, I worried you wouldn't come back. I always came back, I always will. I know that now. But then, I was still learning to trust that good things could last. Marcus turned her to face him, cupping her face in his weathered, calloused hands. Good things can last. We're the proof. 22 years we've been together, and I love you more today than I did on our wedding day. And I'll love you more tomorrow than I do today. You've been saying that since the day we got married, Brielle said, her eyes shining with tears. And it's been true every single time. He kissed her as the sun set, and it was like every other kiss they'd shared over the years, and yet completely unique, a moment all its own. When they finally pulled apart, the stars were emerging, the same stars that had watched over them on countless nights. They rode back to their main house, where Benjamin was waiting for them, having returned from school for the summer. He'd grown tall and broad-shouldered, looking so much like Marcus at that age that it was almost eerie. They ate dinner together, the three of them, talking about Benjamin's studies and his plans for the future. Later, in the privacy of their bedroom, Marcus and Brielle prepared for sleep. It was a comfortable routine built over decades. They moved around each other easily, each knowing what the other needed without having to ask. In bed, Brielle curled against Marcus's side, her head on his chest. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what? For stopping. For offering me water. For giving me a ride. For giving me a chance." "Brielle, I'm pretty sure I'm the one who should be thanking you. You changed my entire life. We changed each other's lives. That's what love does." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other as they'd done thousands of nights before and would do thousands of nights more, God willing. The years marched on. More grandchildren came, more joy, more life. The ranch continued to prosper under Marcus's leadership, and then gradually under Matthew's, as Marcus began to step back and let his son take over. Brielle remained active and involved, her preserves now famous throughout the county, her advice sought by young mothers and experienced grandmothers alike. In 1905, on a warm June day, Marcus and Brielle celebrated their 27th wedding anniversary. The family threw them a party, with all the children and grandchildren there, along with friends from throughout the county. There was food and music and dancing, just like at that first church social where Marcus had nervously asked Brielle to dance. As the sun began to set, Marcus asked Brielle to dance once more. Their children and grandchildren formed a circle around them, watching as the couple moved together with the ease of decades of practice. Marcus held Brielle close and she laid her head on his shoulder, both of them lost in memories and in the moment. "I found you on a dusty trail," Marcus whispered in her ear, "and you said you were looking for a new beginning." "I found so much more than a new beginning," Brielle whispered back. "I found everything." The music played on and they danced beneath the stars, surrounded by the family they'd created and the life they'd built. It was a perfect moment, a crystallization of everything they'd worked for and everything they meant to each other. As they danced, Brielle thought back to that day 27 years ago when she'd been walking alone, desperate and scared, not knowing where her next meal would come from or where she'd sleep that night. She told Marcus she was looking for a new beginning, but she'd found so much more. She'd found love, real and lasting. She'd found home. She'd found herself. Marcus held his wife and looked around at their children and grandchildren, at the land they owned, at the house they'd built together. He thought about that day when he'd rounded a bend in the trail and seen a woman walking alone. He'd had no idea that stopping to offer help would change his entire life. He'd been just a cowboy, working another man's ranch, with no real prospects beyond a steady job and a place to sleep. Now he had everything. The song ended and the family applauded. Matthew stepped forward with a glass raised. "To my parents," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "The strongest, kindest, most loving people I know, thank you for showing us what real love looks like. Thank you for building something lasting and good. Thank you for being the kind of parents and now grandparents that we all aspire to be." Everyone raised their glasses and drank. Beth was crying, though she tried to hide it. Benjamin put his arm around his mother, tall enough now to rest his chin on top of her head. The grandchildren, ranging from toddlers to teenagers, gathered around their grandparents. As the party wound down and families began to head home or to the various guest rooms prepared for them, Marcus and Brielle found themselves alone once more on their porch. The stars were brilliant overhead, the night warm and peaceful. 27 years, Brielle said, shaking her head in wonder. "Sometimes it feels like forever, and sometimes it feels like yesterday." "I know exactly what you mean." Marcus took her hand, running his thumb over her knuckles, over the wedding ring he'd placed there so long ago. "If I could go back and talk to that young cowboy riding down the trail, I'd tell him to look sharp, because he's about to meet the woman who'll change his life. And if I could talk to that scared young woman walking alone, I'd tell her to keep walking, to keep hoping, because something wonderful is just around the bend." They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, hearts full. Inside the house, they could hear the muffled sounds of family settling in for the night, the sounds of home and love and continuity. "You remember what you told me that first day?" Brielle asked. "You said Bentonville was a good town and that I'd find my new beginning there." "I remember." "I had no idea how true that would turn out to be. You gave me that beginning, Marcus. You were my new beginning. And you were mine, Brielle. My life started the day I found you on that trail." They stayed on the porch late into the night, talking about the past and dreaming about the future. There would be more grandchildren, they hoped, and maybe someday great-grandchildren. The ranch would continue under Matthew's leadership, passing from generation to generation. Their love would ripple out through time, affecting lives not yet lived. But most importantly, they had each other. The scared woman walking the dusty trail and the lonely cowboy who stopped to help had become something greater together than either could have been alone. They'd built a life, a family, a legacy of love that would endure. As they finally went inside to bed, Marcus pulled Brielle close one more time. "Thank you," he said. "For what? For walking that trail. For being brave enough to look for a new beginning. For saying yes when I asked you to marry me. For building this life with me. For loving me. For everything." "You don't have to thank me for any of that," Brielle said, touching his cheek gently. "Loving you has been the easiest thing I've ever done, the best thing too." They kissed one more time before sleep claimed them. These two souls who'd found each other in the wilderness and built something beautiful together. The years that followed were good ones. Marcus and Brielle grew older, their hair turning white, their steps becoming slower, but their love never diminished. They watched their grandchildren grow, celebrated as Benjamin married and started his own family, saw the ranch continue to prosper under Matthew's careful stewardship. They took walks together every evening when weather permitted, often ending up at that first small house they'd built together. It had become a sort of shrine to their love, preserved exactly as it had been, a reminder of humble beginnings and huge dreams. Sometimes they'd sit inside in the empty room where Marcus had proposed and remember. Other times they'd just stand outside, looking at the land stretching around them, marveling at what they'd built together. "We did all right," Brielle would say, and Marcus would agree. "We did more than all right. We did something special." In 1910, as they approached their 32nd wedding anniversary, Marcus fell ill. It started as a simple cold but developed into pneumonia. The doctor came and did what he could, but Marcus was 58 and had worked hard his whole life. His body was tired. Brielle refused to leave his bedside, holding his hand through fever dreams and difficult breathing. The family gathered, everyone knowing that this might be the end but hoping it wasn't. Matthew sat with his father, talking about the ranch and asking for advice. Beth came with her children, wanting her father to see them one more time. Benjamin canceled his veterinary rounds to be there, but it was Brielle that Marcus called for when he was lucid. "Don't leave me," he'd whisper. "Never," she'd promise. "I'm right here." One evening, as the sun was setting, Marcus seemed to rally. His breathing eased, his eyes cleared, and he looked at Brielle with full awareness for the first time in days. "There you are," she said, squeezing his hand. "I've missed you." "How long?" he asked, his voice raspy. 5 days. "But the doctor says you're getting better. You're going to be fine." Marcus smiled slightly. "Don't lie to me, Brielle. We've never lied to each other." Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "All right. The doctor says it could go either way, but I'm choosing to believe you'll get better." "You're too stubborn to die." "I don't want to leave you," Marcus said, and tears leaked from his own eyes. "I promised I'd love you for as long as I lived, but it's not long enough. 100 years wouldn't be long enough." "Then don't leave. Stay with me. Fight." "I'm trying, love. I'm trying so hard." He squeezed her hand weakly, and she bent to kiss his forehead. "Remember that first day?" she asked. "When you found me walking the trail? Best day of my life, mine too. You saved me, Marcus. In every way a person can be saved." "You saved me too," he whispered. "I was just existing before you. You taught me how to live." They stayed like that, hands clasped, as the sun set. The family came in to say goodnight, each getting a moment with Marcus, saying things that needed to be said. When they were alone again, Brielle climbed carefully into bed beside Marcus, as close as she dared without hurting him. "Tell me about the trail," Marcus said. "Tell me about walking alone before you found me." So Brielle told the story, embellishing it with details she'd never shared before. How her feet had blistered and bled. How she'd seen Marcus coming and thought about hiding because she didn't know if he could be trusted. How she'd made herself stand tall and brave even though she'd been terrified. How his kindness had been the first good thing to happen to her in so long she'd almost forgotten what kindness felt like. "And then you offered me water," she said. "Such a simple thing, but it meant everything. It meant I wasn't alone anymore." Marcus smiled, his eyes drifting closed. "I knew," he murmured. "The moment I saw you, I knew my life was about to change. I didn't know how, but I knew." "I knew too," Brielle whispered. "I just didn't want to hope. Hope hurt too much, but you made me hope anyway." She felt him relax beside her, his breathing deepening into sleep. She didn't move, didn't want to disturb him, just held his hand and prayed. Through the night, Brielle dozed fitfully, waking every time Marcus stirred or coughed. But as dawn broke, she realized his breathing had changed. It was easier, deeper, more natural. When he opened his eyes, they were clear. "You're still here," he said, sounding surprised. "I told you I'd never leave. Did you think I was lying?" "I thought maybe I'd died and you were an angel. If you died, I'd have followed you. You're not getting away from me that easily." Marcus laughed, which turned into a cough, but it was a good laugh, full of life. The doctor came that morning and declared it a miracle. Marcus was on the mend. It would take time and rest, but he was going to recover. The family rejoiced, and Brielle cried tears of relief and gratitude. She'd come so close to losing him, and it had made her realize all over again how precious their time together was. Marcus recovered slowly, following doctor's orders for once in his life because he knew how scared Brielle had been. He let Matthew handle the ranch entirely, accepting that his working days were mostly behind him. Instead, he focused on healing and spending time with family. By their 32nd anniversary, Marcus was well enough to walk to their special spot at the first house they'd built together. They went in the evening, as they'd done so many times before, and sat on the porch steps watching the sun set. "I thought I was going to lose you," Brielle said quietly. "You almost did. I'm sorry I scared you. Don't apologize, just promise me something. Anything. Promise me we'll have more time. Years and years more." Marcus pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "I can't promise that. None of us know how much time we have. But I can promise that whatever time we have left, I'll spend it loving you with everything in me." "That's a good promise," Brielle said. "And I promise the same." They stayed until dark, then walked slowly back to their house, supporting each other, two people who'd become one over decades of love and partnership. Marcus lived another 8 years, defying everyone's expectations. They were good years, filled with grandchildren and laughter and quiet moments together. His health was never quite what it had been, but he didn't let that stop him from enjoying life. He learned to pace himself, to appreciate the simple pleasures of a sunrise or a conversation with his wife or watching his grandchildren play. In 1918, as Marcus approached his 66th birthday, he and Brielle celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. The family threw them an enormous party, with people coming from all over Arkansas to honor the couple who'd built such a remarkable life together. They danced once more, slowly and carefully, but with all the love they'd always had. Marcus looked at his wife, now 59, her hair white but her green eyes still as beautiful as they'd been when she was 22. 40 years, he marveled. "How did we get so lucky?" "It wasn't luck," Brielle replied. "It was choice. Every day we chose each other, and that made all the difference." "Best choice I ever made," Marcus said. "Best choice I'll ever make." 6 months later, on a cold January morning, Marcus woke with pain in his chest. He called for Brielle, and she sent for the doctor, but they both knew what was happening. His heart, which had loved so fiercely for so long, was giving out. The family gathered once more. This time there would be no miraculous recovery. Marcus was calm about it, ready in a way he hadn't been 8 years earlier. He'd had more time than he'd expected, and he was grateful for it. He said his goodbyes to each child and grandchild, giving advice and blessings, telling them how proud he was. When they were alone, he turned to Brielle. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry I have to leave you. Don't be sorry. You've given me 40 wonderful years. That's more than most people ever get. It's not enough. I wanted more. I know, I want more too, but I'm grateful for what we had." Marcus took her hand, the same hand he'd held thousands of times over 4 decades. "Do you remember what I told you on our wedding day? That I couldn't promise I'd never leave, because none of us know what tomorrow brings." "I remember. But I also promised I'd love you with everything I had for as long as I lived. I kept that promise, Brielle, every single day. I know you did. I felt it every single day. You'll be all right without me. You're the strongest person I've ever known. I'm only strong because you made me strong. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." Marcus smiled, even through the pain. "I just saw what was already there. That woman walking alone on the dusty trail looking for a new beginning, she was already strong. She'd already survived so much. I just gave her a reason to keep surviving. You gave me more than that. You gave me a reason to live, not just survive. You gave me joy and love and purpose. You gave me everything." They talked through the night, reminiscing and laughing and crying. As dawn broke, Marcus's breathing became labored. Brielle climbed into bed beside him as she had that other time, holding him close. "I love you," Marcus whispered. "From the moment I saw you until this very last moment, I have loved you." "I love you too," Brielle said through her tears. "So much, so very much." "Will you tell me about the trail one more time? Tell me about that brave woman walking alone, looking for her new beginning." So Brielle told the story again, her voice breaking but steady. She told him about the dust and the heat, about seeing him coming on his horse, about the way he'd offered her water and kindness and hope. She told him about falling in love, about building a life, about every precious moment of their 40 years together. Marcus listened, his eyes closed, a smile on his face. When she finished, he squeezed her hand one last time. "Found it," he whispered. "We found our new beginning." "We did," Brielle agreed. "We really did." And with his wife's hand in his and the story of their love in his ears, Marcus Tanner took his last breath. He went peacefully, a man who'd lived well and loved deeply and had no regrets. Brielle held him for a long time before calling for the family. She cried, of course she cried, but there was also gratitude mixed with the grief. They'd had 40 years, which was more than many couples ever got. They'd built something beautiful together, something that would last long after both of them were gone. The funeral was one of the largest Bentonville had ever seen. Marcus had touched many lives over his 66 years, and people came from all over to pay their respects. They buried him on the ranch, near that first small house where they'd started their life together. Brielle lived another 12 years, surrounded by family and love, but always missing her Marcus. She never remarried, never even considered it. Marcus had been her one great love, her new beginning, her everything. She filled her days with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, passing down stories about the man who'd stopped to help a woman walking alone on a dusty trail. When she was 71, Brielle fell asleep one spring night and simply didn't wake up. They buried her next to Marcus, reuniting them in death as they'd been in life. On the shared headstone, their children had inscribed, "Two souls, one journey, eternal love." The ranch continued under Matthew's stewardship and eventually passed to his children and grandchildren. The family grew and branched out, spreading across Arkansas and beyond, but they never forgot their roots. That first small house was preserved and maintained by each generation, a shrine to the love that had started it all. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun was setting and the stars were just beginning to appear, those who walked near that small house would swear they could see two figures sitting on the porch, holding hands, watching the land they'd built together. Some said it was just shadows, but others knew better. They knew it was Marcus and Brielle still together, still in love, still watching over the family and the legacy they'd created, because true love doesn't end with death. It transcends it, rippling out through generations, touching lives decades and centuries later. Marcus and Brielle's love story became a family legend, told and retold, inspiring each new generation to believe in the power of love, the importance of kindness, and the possibility of new beginnings. The woman who'd walked alone on a dusty trail, looking for a new beginning, had found so much more. She'd found love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. She'd found home and family and purpose. And the cowboy who'd stopped to offer help had found the same. Together, they'd built something beautiful, something lasting, something that would endure as long as there were people to remember their story. And in the end, that's all any of us can hope for. To love deeply, to live fully, and to leave the world a little better than we found it. Marcus and Brielle Tanner did exactly that. and their legacy lives on in every descendant who carries their blood, in every person who hears their story and believes a little more in the power of love, in every couple who chooses each other every single day and builds something beautiful together. Their story began on a dusty trail in 1878 Arkansas, with a desperate woman and a kind cowboy, and it became a love for the ages, a testament to the incredible things that can happen when two people find each other at exactly the right moment and choose to build a new beginning together.